Hey, it's Mike from Apollo, and today we're doing something a little bit different. You'll often see me and watch me talking about product and marketing and bringing teams together, maybe a little bit of unit economics on the business. Now we're going to talk about raising funding, and we're going to tackle some legal and financial documents that are essential. And I've just worked on a project with a client on getting all of this ready, bringing everybody together. So it's really fresh of mind. So I really wanted to share it with you, kind of get these fresh learnings, insights, get them to you. I think importantly, I've kind of framed this around raising money for your startup, but I think it's so much more than that. I think it's like what I'm going to show you is not just about being ready to raise funding, but I actually think that a lot of these things can help you do business better. So this is like ready to do business almost. And these documents, of course, you should be speaking to legal and accounting experts and counsel. Of course, you should do that. But what I wanted to do is give you a founder's point of view on what you need, why you need it. But I think importantly, I've got some keywords here, is that we tend to be a bit too optimistic about how things are going to work out. We tend to rely a lot on verbal agreements, and particularly on the finances, lack of detail. And I've seen this over the 30 years I've been doing startups and creating new companies. So I really want to share with you some of the trigger moments that cause the need for these documents, or you become aware of the lack of these documents, or that the documents are not sufficient to deal with the issue in the way in which you wish you had done it. So I'm going to do the events, and then I'm going to do my favorite top 5 legal, top 5 financial, and that'll set you up so you can go and work with your experts, your accountant, your CFO, your financial experts, as well as your legal counsel. And you can make sure that you've really thought through not only these documents, but also I love the idea of scenario planning, what if, plan A, plan B. So I really want to bring up those topics as well. So here you've got one of my groovy little apps again. This one's all about startup funding readiness. We have a 0% readiness score. We're going to go through this together in this video, and we're going to get it all updated, and we're going to be rocking and rolling. So the 5 events. So the first one is raising funding here. Now this event is a natural trigger, because when you are raising funding, whether it be from angels or institutional VCs, you're going to be asked to provide a set of materials, and that's often done in a data room. Now, here's the key thing. It's really so much more than what's in the data room. It's about how they all relate together. And last year I worked on a project where we had to file for a listing with a client. And what was really interesting is that when you raise funding, you see this relationship between a couple of documents. And I think this was a massive insight that I was really keen to share with you. So let's say you have in your revenue, you have a client for 100K. They will then want to look, this is the auditor or your counterparty, they will then want to look in your bank account and see that they transferred you 100K. And then they will want to see the legal documentation that balances against that. So there's an agreement for 100K. You've a recognized revenue of 100K. You have a 100K transaction in your bank. That is like harmony. That's like, as an entrepreneur, you need to understand that you need that balance between these legal and financial documents. And what you can't do is say, well, we agreed 100, we only billed 80, we did it in 3 parts. Well, does the documentation represent that? So when those documents are not aligned, when there are discrepancies between them, you don't have the control of your business. And what starts to happen is doubt and uncertainty goes into the mind of your counterparty. So there is nothing better than when a third party looks at your data room and it's like, this is all really good. We have a few minor questions, a few clarifications. What really sucks is when they say, oh, here is a big whip list of all the issues. We don't understand this doesn't match this, cash versus forecast versus revenue versus legal. But when all of those things start to wobble and not match, the integrity of those documents is a reflection of the integrity of the business. And then that really kind of jumps into, is this an investable business, yay or nay? So I really wanted to share with you around fundraising, you do need to have the integrity between those different documents. And that was a huge learning for me, because we were getting audited to file on a market in the US. So the degree of which we were being held accountable was insane. And it was actually really, really good experience. I learned a ton from that. So that's like a really positive thing, fundraising. Slightly less positive is the idea of a founder leaving. Now, what's often the case is when we do get together in an early stage startup, we are full of optimism. We're hoping for the best. We're going to conquer the world. And invariably, we don't have too much consideration of, well, what if one of the founders leaves? And if so, what happens? Invariably, the founder is leaving thinking, hey, I contributed, so therefore I am entitled to what was promised. But maybe in the paperwork, or maybe not, if you're departing, maybe this is affecting vesting, ownership, and then voting rights once they have departed. So this expectation gap is massive. And invariably, if you haven't done the right sort of agreements, which I'll talk about in a second, you get this massive imbalance that someone is leaving. It's either a push or a pull. And in that departure, there's going to be expectations. And they invariably, those that remain and those that are going, are in a different place. A lot of tension, a lot of issues there. And if you have the right documentation, you can actually reduce a lot of that friction. I don't think a founder leaving is ever easy, but you can make it a bit more easier if you've thought through these things. So we're going to talk about that. So 1, raising funding. 2, a founder's off. The next thing here is hiring early employees. Now, obviously, the early employees have a couple of things. First of all, they're making a big jump because there's a lot of uncertainty. 2, you're often cash poor, so you're offering generous ESOPs, or by just virtue of the fact that they have an employee stock option program to be participating in, they will be in it longer than everybody else, so they will accrue more vesting. So what's really important here is that people often putting themselves and their families at risk by taking an equity position and deferring some of the payment till, sort of a liquidation moment down the track. Now, what you want to make sure is you haven't promised someone a certain percentage of the business and you haven't documented it appropriately, because it could be that you have a star employee who thinks they've got 5% of the company or 3% of the company, and actually you haven't papered it correctly. They don't actually have that equity, but they feel like they've made a massive investment because they thought they had that equity. Ooh, very messy. We need to manage that. Another one here is you might start off in the mid-market or with consumers, but you might work your way up towards bigger enterprise clients. Those enterprise clients, particularly as you get towards mission critical situations where your tech goes into theirs, when your tech is on what we call on premises of the enterprise client, they are going to do due diligence that will be akin to that of an investor. They may even look for, particularly if you have like a web services, highly integrated architecture that you have or you're going into, it can be like a lot of moving parts, and they'll want to establish what do you truly own. So IP comes up a lot in that as well. One note on the enterprise clients, if you have licensed a lot of third-party tech into your platform, you need to, we have this concept of like back-to-back. So you need to be sure that you can offer certain rights, provide certain warranties and guarantees to your enterprise client. And it may be that you are rolling up the dependencies you have from third parties. So you just need to check that they're back to back, or what we might call traceable, so that you can go back through your stack to make sure you don't make promises to your enterprise client that you actually can't keep. Okay, so these are 4 big events that happen that cause these sort of financial and legal problems. So raising funding, founder departure, hiring early employees, big enterprise client. So therefore, 5th one is an acquisition offer. So very rarely do startups actually get to file, list, and go onto an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. Very rare. So what is much more common, obviously, is mergers and acquisitions, joining forces. And one of the things here is very similar to a VC. They will be looking deep into your business on the legal and financial side. And also you will want to make sure that the promises you're making to a potential merger partner, that you in fact are putting on the table what your contribution is going to be so that the deal is fair. Very often with acquisition, what I've seen is it's sort of caveat emptor, buyer beware, like the buyer didn't get what they thought they were getting. Regardless of which side of that table you're sitting on, what you want to be able to do is talk with clarity and talk with confidence about what you can put on the table. And you need to look at what your counterparty is doing, because then you can search for what we call that win-win design of a transaction where both parties are getting what they want from the deal. Okay, 5 major events. 5 events that are all related to funding, 5 events that are all related to actually just being ready to do business. So right now on our app, we're 0% ready. So now let's go and dig into some of the legal and financial documents that I've consistently seen to be important. These documents go across any industry. They go across B2B, B2C. It really doesn't matter on region. What I will say here is what my experience has been is I've taken my best shot at giving you 5 legal and 5 financial. Your situation, like let's say you're an exotic deep tech and you've got sovereign funding, there may be some different things, or maybe you're a B Corp. Those kind of use cases or edge cases might bring up other topics. But I think for vast majority, at least 80% of startups, if you have these, you'll be in a good place. If you've at least considered these and talked with counsel and talked with your experts, and if you choose not to have it right now and you choose to do it later, then you are wiser, you have that clarity. And it's about knowing that you could have these trigger events that you see on the screen, but it's also about knowing that you're going to be requiring a document to deal with these kind of topics and themes and subjects, whether it's this specific one or it's called something else, it doesn't really matter. I want you to look at this and go, okay, great. I know that's coming. I don't need to do it now, but I do plan to do it in Q3, Q4. And definitely, if you see one of these trigger events in the horizon, you can plan to it. I would say, though, it's very hard with a degree of confidence to predict these things. I think the market can just bring up things a little bit quicker than you expect. And you can be caught a little bit short-handed because you don't have these. So just be aware of this, because as we go into this, we're going to get to 100% readiness. But I want you just to have that consideration if you do defer anything. Okay, let's get into legal. I'm certainly no lawyer, but I have been across so many transactions with legal issues, with legal components. I have done this in Europe, in North America, in Asia. So I've seen all sorts of weird and wonderful combinations. So this is great. That's a chance for me just to talk you through what is really important. Okay, let's get into the founders agreement. the first, and you might even think of this as foundational for you and your co-founders. I think here, you really want to take the time to be explicit in writing about a couple of things: the roles, the equity, the vesting, and the exit rules. Roles and responsibilities, pretty straightforward there. I would say that I do see a lot of founders overlapping, and that tends to be a source of future frustration. So really just try and have like an elegant Venn diagram where there's a little bit of overlap, but not like, you're in each other's pockets. As far as equity, one of the big things that might come up is you might have classes of equity. Beyond how much, what percentage of equity, how many shares you'll be issued. There is obviously what type of equity. Sometimes there will be preferential. This is sometimes for the founders. This is certainly something that comes up in that seed and Series A round of funding as well. So this founders agreement should tackle that. Vesting, classic 1-year cliff, 4-year vesting period. You might have a variation of this, but generally the vesting, the way those grants are being given to you, that will happen on a time basis. And that's particularly important when you think about employees and venture capital. So you have internal, you have external people. You want to have a consistent way of granting equity. Not so much that you would go and tell everyone what the percentages of equity everyone has, but I would say if you imagine the founders, the ESOP and the VC equity was transparent to everyone, would people think it's somewhat reasonable, or would they be highly upset and emotional about it? Because you'll be amazed that sometimes over a few drinks, people do tend to talk. So you might think it's pretty confidential, but I've seen agreements where folks have found out that others have far greater equity than themselves, and that being a source of a lot of issues. So forgetting your investor readiness, I just want harmony for the founders. So you just need to make sure that that's consistent. Okay, so you need that founders agreement. Really important, particularly because you might be also sacrificing a lot at the start. Like you might all be on a zero salary for the first 6 months. So when we move to shareholders agreement and company constitution, this moves beyond the founders and kind of sets the scene for how the business will operate, how it's going to interact not only with the founders, but how it will interact with employees, venture capital, and third parties. So something that I mentioned, and you'll hear like famous stories about voting rights and control and share transfers. So you have to basically set a shareholders agreement about, well, how are these shares going to move about in the system? Who does what, who has the rights to do what, how much, when, and that sort of thing. Because sometimes people make assumptions about their rights, what they can control, or what they can move around. And again, a source of confusion and tension if it's not clear in the shareholders agreement. So you've got founders, you've got shareholders agreement, two separate things, and then you have the company constitution. Now, what's really important about that is those three really go well together, because the company constitution in Commonwealth countries, you will sometimes hear people talking about bylaws for the company constitution. That's really about how the company legally operates, under what form of registered business, for example, LLC, C Corp, proprietary limited, B Corp, all of those sorts of things. And it also will particularly talk about, maybe there's a holding company involved as well as a local registered limited entity, and obviously the share classes as well. So you've really kind of dealt with a lot of equity and basic legal operation in those first three. So sometimes, like I've seen, that you don't need to do the shareholders agreement immediately. That comes after, you've maybe been going for 6 months and you're starting to hire some people. Constitution, Founders Agreement, very, very, very essential, very early. So that we've got those three. Now, what is really important is to plan for not only the exciting thing of hiring and growing, but also firing, leaving, departing. And that's why those 5 trigger events, those scenarios, raising funding. So you would look at this and be like, we should be designing such that we're not only taking care of the founders, but we know we're going to raise capital in the future. We know we're going to go to a couple of VCs. So those first 3 docs should be drafted and designed in such a way that you're already thinking about the raise in how you structure the organization. And we'll get to some other ones as well, like cap table and intellectual property. So this is where you start to set the scene. You are writing a constitution, shareholders agreement, knowing that maybe in 2 years you're going to raise capital. You draft all of these documents around equity and shares because you've got a number of founders, and you don't want to be over optimistic. Let's just be like, hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of thinking, and let's make sure that if someone is departing as a founder, how's it going to work? What do they forfeit? What rights do they have once they have left the organization? These are like super hot topics. Okay, so these are 3 of the 5 legal docs that I think you would be well deserved to consider for your early stage startup prior to funding. 2 more, IP assignment and cap table records. So with intellectual property, I want you to imagine that sometimes a founder has been working on something before the company is created. Well, that intellectual property needs to be clear who owns that and if it is transferred, against what value. That's a really important thing. And as well, it's not just the founders, it's the employees. And it's not just the founders and employees, it's all the third parties that you might touch upon. Advisors, vendors. If you have like a development team that's offshore, your IP assignment with them, very, very important. So why this becomes important is if you are taking a position that you have built a system, you've built an application, you've written the code, and that it behaves as a platform with certain business characteristic and makes a bunch of money, has future growth ambitions, what you'll notice is like, oh, it does this thing and it's going to grow. Let's say that it is a great product and it has great growth potential. You could basically throw all those arguments out with a venture capital firm if you've got really poor intellectual property assignment for the actual code, for the working system. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't matter if it's great. It doesn't matter if it makes a lot of money. You don't own it. So you cannot make it part of your valuation. So you cannot raise the funds that you wish to do. So classic thing would be, hey, we're 2 non-tech founders. We offshored and outsourced the building of the platform, and you've gone to raise money and you realize, oh my gosh, we don't own it. So what are the investors buying in that situation? Well, they don't have a platform to buy. And this is where what you see is, as we go through this list, and we're only like 4 out of the 10 here. But as we go to IP, you can, forget the cap table. You don't have anything to sell if you haven't got the IP nicely packaged. So the cap table. What's really important is that you have those earlier documents, which is agreements around the shares, but you then need certificates and board approvals. This rigor is really important because not only do the early documents say we promise to give this if you do X, Y, and Z, what this cap table facility is doing, and there's like whole software platforms that just manage cap table, is they make sure that the certificates and relevant approvals are noted, that there is a ledger against those. So you are absolutely watertight on saying we promised you X, we issued you X, and it was approved by the board, by the constitution of this company. So we're in a very solid, rigorous, traceable situation on the legalities of equity and intellectual property. These are the things that float through those legal docs. So cap table is really important because sometimes it is created at the start and then gets super messy. Sometimes it's created at the start and then not updated to reflect the recent agreements. Many times there are never any certificates issued. So this is really important. The more that you focus on those trigger events that I have up at the top here, raising funding, mergers and acquisitions, it's really important because from a third-party perspective, regardless of investment or acquisition, when I see great cap table, a full log of the certificates and the approvals, it's only human nature for the acquiring company to go, oh, great, so I'm not expecting too many issues with shareholders coming up, surfacing issues. Now that we've bought the entity, I don't want to be buying problems, right? So that's why when you look at these 5 things, just from a legal perspective, as a third party is looking at your business, if you have issues on each of these 5, founders, shareholders agreements, company constitution, IP and cap table, you can see it's like death of 1,000 cuts. Like the confidence that the third party is going to have in your company when you've got issues along this, they're really just like, I'm buying a headache here. This is going to be a drama. So let's do better than just verbal agreements. Let's not just be optimistic. Let's do the work. Because if you have a founders agreement, shareholders agreement, good constitution, good bylaws, you're really tight on IP and the cap table, I think you're 50% there if you're doing a Series A. But you know what? Even if you're only thinking about a seed round, think about the issues that I've mentioned and how great it would be just to have these 5 things to protect the company, to protect the employees, actually all of the stakeholders, everybody knows where they're at, so they can be much more focused on creating value rather than arguing about missed expectations, misunderstanding, misinterpretations. Like that's what ends up happening. People spend an inordinate amount of time arguing rather than building. Okay, so we're 50% of the way there. Now we're going to go over to the financial side. And again, all of these 5 events that we've got on screen, I chose those because they invariably will force some attention to detail that a lot of founders are either too busy or don't naturally have that level of expertise or desire to get in the weeds and really look at those details. Okay, so let's get to 100% readiness, huh? The first thing is your monthly financial statements. It amazes me how not every company has as a natural operating biorhythm to produce by the second week of the month the financial statements for the previous month. You want to see your profits, your losses, your balance sheet, and cash flow statements. You want to have a control at this level, just like you want to have control of the shares, who owns what over on this left-hand side with the legal. On the financial side, oh my gosh, you want to make sure that from a financial point of view, you have a grip on the business. Classic thing is if there's an overspend, it needs to be corrected in the following month. We sent too many people to a big event. The costs came in. All right, no events for 2 months. We got to rebalance the cash flow of this business. These basic documents, and the 3 key ones, profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flow statements. I mean, the critical one is always having enough cash to survive. And that's actually going to come back in a whole separate document. But the rigor to do this, for example, let's say you have a founder departure. What's the value of the company? Well, let's have a look at the financial statements. Oh, we haven't done one for 2 months. Then you have this issue because you can't draw an accurate valuation of the business. You can't depart the founder. It triggers all these sorts of things. So, I mean, the reality is, yes, it's great for raising funding, but really it's also great for running your business as well. So monthly financial statements. With QuickBooks, with Xero these days, there's really no excuse for this, but management needs to make it a priority. The cost of dealing with it now, it's just part of your normal operating business, is like this compared to when one of these becomes a blocker for an acquisition, the enterprise client, hiring employees. So just make it part of your rhythm. You will also have great external help available. You'll have great external software tools as well. So you should be able to tackle that. Revenue documentation. Well, of course, you might have the cash in the bank and how things are moving, but your forecast and actuals for revenue are going to be crucial. I don't know how you can do a forecast if you don't have actuals, right? So if you want to totally guess what your revenue will be, that's your choice. But if you want to be forensic about your revenue, what you have the chance to do is you can say, look, Q3 is looking a bit soft. Because we have very good control of our finances, we know we could spend more on advertising, and that would actually generate this amount of leads, and we can take this action early enough. So it's sort of a cost-benefit analysis. You can only do that from looking at your forecast, and you can only look at your forecast on revenue if you actually know what your actuals are. And this is very important because there will be this idea of what you sold. So we sold $1 million contract, okay, but that might be based on 100K a month, okay? So you have sold a total value of contract as $1 million. It might be accrued month by month as 100K per month. And then there's actually, when does that cash come in? So there could be 30 or 60-day terms of payment with that. We need just to make sure that that all balances out. And this comes back to one of my earliest points, is where you see the relationship between we sold the client for $1 million, we have got paid what, and we have the legal agreements to make sure that we have the Master Services Agreement or the SLA or Statement of Work, whatever is related to that revenue. That revenue documentation is super important, organized by client so that you can check different repositories of data and say, okay, client XYZ, what have we got signed with them? What are they actually getting billed? When are we getting paid? Two big drivers of the business here, the monthly statements and the revenue documentation. What you see the revenue documentation really starts to enable you to do is be much more accurate about the future, which, if it's not looking good, take action. If it's looking really good, it gives you a strong position towards any sort of third party, be it acquisition or funding. Okay, expense policy, getting a little random here. Why is expenses so important? Because in the early days, sometimes there's a blurring between personal and professional. In the early days, maybe costs were incurred when there was no legal entity formed, and there's a transference of these third-party costs to build the product. They've had to come in. So what is the expense policy, and how does that relate to salaries? What's in, what's out? Clear rules there so that you don't have people racking up big costs and then having a big argument. You can't charge that to the company. Now, we're going to get a bit more bigger picture, burn and runway analysis, which you can't have if you don't have revenue docs. And it certainly can't do if you don't have your monthly financial docs. You need to be in a very clear position to say, if our revenue stays flat, how long do we have to survive? If our revenue declines, how long do we have to survive? And I recently met a founder who said to me that they had 4 or 5 months of runway. And when I asked the question, are you raising? They were like, not 100% sure. Now, the pattern that I see when I combine these 4 docs is I was able just to offer this observation. Well, you got 4 months, but generally a raise at your size will probably take about 6 months. So are you raising or not? And how are you managing those extra 2 months? And that's in a best case scenario. What happens if you don't raise? What you see there is that you get the chance when you have not only these financial docs, but you can see with the legal docs, you can make better decisions about who's on the team, what are we doing, funding, M&A, how you're going out into the world. Because invariably, because of this lack of detail here with finances, we get ourselves into a corner and our options reduce. Classic thing is companies working out that they have less cash, less runway, less time to survive than they realized. That's a really nasty one. Sometimes it's just like an experience I've had is that you figure out from the sales team that they're going to miss target and they won't have enough time to catch it up in the following quarter. So it means you're going to miss target for the year. I learned a painful lesson then. In this case, know your burn rate, know your levers and your options, and know the answer to the question, how much time do we have? In one of my previous videos, I showed you when we did B2B profit books, once you've got your unit economics, which we're going to talk about in a second, then you start to look at cash and how's that moving through the business. Very important. I go into a lot more detail in that other video, so just check it out. The fifth one. So right now, if we had these five legal docs and these 4 financial docs, we would be already at 90% readiness. I would say we would be better than 90% of most early stage companies as well. We've got one last one here, the financial model. Now, what I generally find is founders have a sense of this, but no one's done the detailed, forensic, traceable work of putting it on paper, and particularly when you're changing your business model, your financial model, and doing a sort of compare and contrast. And this is really, really important. If you look at your model, you have your unit economics, so the raw costs associated with delivering each unit of value to your customer, then how you price against that, and then how you hire and put resources against that. What a good financial model will do is show you often the real challenge. Oh, you want to charge that price against that cost basis with this team. Invariably, you'll be like, I need another 5 people, or I can't charge that much. Those are the sort of things come up. To be honest, those are the most meaty, exciting, challenging parts of being an entrepreneur. Like, there's no way to avoid those. But if you have a financial model, you complete this picture because you know financially you have the controls, you have the clarity. Revenue docs shows you kind of not only how money is coming in, but potentially gives you a clue to the future. Expenses, how you're burning some costs. Burn and runway, like how long have we got to survive? But the model is like, we can't hire anymore, but we need to deal with this scope of work. How are we going to do that? Great challenge. It's clarity. So much of the thing is having clarity on the problem. And I am sure with all the great people in your team, you'll figure it out. 5 legal docs, 5 financial documents, probably more spreadsheets than docs, but the point here is you've got 10 things that prepare you for these challenges that come. And these things will get you at 100% readiness to get funding, but also to get your business on track. Think about it. You won't be having all those founder disputes. You won't be arguing about IP. You can deal with it before you start a project. And you have the pulse of the way cash is moving through your company. And this will often reveal that you're not only creating value for your customers, but then it brings you to this question, are you capturing value? Is there profit? When all is said and done, are you capturing enough value? Those 5 documents for finance, huge empowerment. The legal ones gives you clarity, folks. You can calm, you can With both of these buckets of documents, with these 10 things, you can raise well, you can avoid nasty departures, you can hire some great people, you can go win those enterprise clients, and maybe people want to come and merge or acquire your business, which is all great outcomes. These are the underlying deliverables and hard work that you need to have that startup funding readiness. As you can see here, we got to 100%. I hope you've enjoyed all of these insights. If you want more insights, head to apolloadvisor.com, where you see all my tools that will help you run a great business. All right, that's it for now. Catch you next time.